Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Michigan Community Services Commission's training series for March. We're headed into April. It's hard to believe, but here we are. And one of the things that we're going to talk about today is grant writing. We have a session that has been pre-recorded. This is with the Nonprofit Network in Jackson. This is Regina Penny. She's the executive director, and they are one of our volunteer generation partners, which Michigan was given a volunteer generation fund grant. We affectionately called it VGF. And that the goal of that is to increase the number of volunteers that are serving in the state of Michigan, in addition to increasing the capacity of nonprofits such as yours to do things like grant writing. And so that you're a stronger organization, you have the ability to use more of the skills that volunteers bring in, and that you also increase your reach of your nonprofit. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hit play. We have tested the messages on the volume, but please, if you need to, let me know in the chat if you have, if anything's going on.
Role in your organization. And so this is presented to you at no charge to you by the Jackson Community Foundation and United Way of Jackson County. You will be getting a recording of this and that you can re-watch and take additional notes should you so choose. Our session goals today, these are the goals that were communicated in the emails and the description of the workshop. We're going to talk about what funders are looking for in grant recipients, what components of successful grant proposals are, a customizable to-do list, which means and this is, I'm going to be full disclosure, this is a to-do list that you're creating. I'm going to be giving you prompts throughout the day. You're going to need a piece of paper and a pen. And I would have your notes from the session and a separate piece of paper that includes your actions, your to-dos that are required. And then how to actually engage culturally and programmatically, how all of the people within your organization work together to create your grant applications. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get to know one another. So what I want you to do, you can either jot some notes down or you pull out your phone and you take a picture of your screen so that you have the document or the prompts in front of you. And you're going to be in small breakouts of 3 to 4 people. You're going to have 3 to 4, no more than 5 minutes. And I want you to introduce yourself to one another. Remember to take notes about the people that you're learning from, and feel free to share contact information if you find somebody that has a strategy or a component that is important to you.
Hey, Regina.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you make me co-host?
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I would sit here and go, Emerald, how come you're not doing it? So I'm going to give Emerald just a minute to create those breakout rooms. And have someone from your group decide to kind of share some commonalities when we get back, and then we'll get into the content.
So we will not actually use the breakouts, but tell me, if someone wants to, ask or put in the chat, what your name is, your role in your organization, and then answer these questions about the tenure at Seeking Funds and your grant experience, and one thing you want to use. What do you want to learn from the session today? Oops.
So this is
organization?
Mary up at the Barbecue Gunlock Shelter in Calumet.
Yeah. Hi,
I'm a
Mary.
much quicker talker than I am a typer, and so
That's
um,
perfect.
yeah, I'm the executive director at the Barbecue Gunlock Shelter. We're a shelter for victims of domestic violence in the very northern UP of Michigan, and I've been here in this role as director since 2014, but I've been at the agency for 32 years. So I've been writing grants since then, and I knew about how to write grants before I became director. However, you know, and they're not all the same, and so I'm just trying to learn if there's some of those key words that we need to have that would convince somebody to give you that grant.
Okay, well, this is great. So, I think what we're seeing is we have folks that, have had a lot of experience. I think you're absolutely onto something, Mary. Everybody is always looking for, hey, how is this evolving? How is it changing? How do we keep in line with it? And then a lot of people here are new, so that is okay. And yes, so that is perfectly okay. And we know that we all need more experience in this. So you should never feel like, oh, I'm new to it, I can't do this, or, this is maybe something that's over my head. It's my best advice. Answer the question that they give you. That is my number one advice. I never had a lot of experience with that before, when I first got started, but I knew how to follow directions, and that's exactly what I did to the T. And I would almost rephrase the question and then answer it. And I found that was one of the things that helped me considerably. Boy, you're all doing such a great job. And you want to, I think we could do that. And then, so please keep those going, and let's go back and see. I love these. I love your comments, though. This is great.
Emerald, if you're ready, we're going to put them into breakout rooms. You have 5 minutes to introduce yourselves and talk about your role, your experience writing grants, and in preparation, one thing that you want to get from today's session. So Emerald will put you in, and remember to just hit that join breakout room and you'll Star Trek it in. Welcome back, everybody. So give me a thumbs up if you met somebody cool. Awesome. Give me a thumbs up if you met somebody you want to get to know better. Awesome. Give me a thumbs up if you collected contact information yet. Nice. Well, you can put it in the chat, or remember, you can use that chat to direct message folks. And also use the chat to communicate some of the things that you thought about that you'd like hoping to learn about today. One reminder I have for you is to remember that when I call on you, I'm going to be using the name that is underneath your video. So if it's your child's name, if it's a name that doesn't look like a name, I'm going to struggle. So you might want to rename yourself. So I just wanted to share that I'll call on somebody and you might be like, who's she calling on? I'm waving at her. Okay, awesome. And then also, you should have an email now or very shortly with the slides in it. So again, I don't anticipate that you need those slides now, but you're going to want those slides later. And I just want to, so you're all typing furiously with what you want to learn, and I'll check back in with those in just a minute. The next tool that we're using today is a stoplight. You're going to see this tool 4 or 5 times today. This is where you need to put in your notes. You can use, if you're a note taker, with different colors, or you can just use red as stop. I have to stop doing this. It's a bad practice, it's a bad habit, or it's a way of thinking or structuring my grant programs or my grant practices that are not efficient or effective. Yellow is, I need to think more about that. I need to do more research, or I need to collect more information, or I need to go find. But yellow is a curiosity color, and green is, I need to start doing this. Again, structuring your notes, structuring the files in your brain, your internal processes with a traffic light is useful. So we use this tool. I'm going to stop a couple of times throughout the workshop so that not necessarily for group sharing, but for you to help organize what you're learning and how you're applying it. Okay. So the title has a weird word in it, and I want to make sure that we're all on the same page. Optimum role, grant writing's optimum role within your organization. So what does that mean? This means that we're using our grant writing, using our requests for funding through grants as conducive to the most favorable outcome. And a recognition that some of us are using grant writing as a jack of all trades. It's the magic bullet. It's the medicine that's going to cure all of our ills. And I want to make sure that we're utilizing grant writing as appropriately as we can in our philanthropy program, that it is an element of how we fundraise and attract dollars to our organization. And Optimum is, what is the function of grant writing and what is the function of those grant dollars within our organization? So this is a key indicator in this definition, our definition of this word, Webster's definition, that we're talking about grant writing not only globally, like from a 30,000 foot level about where it fits within your organization, and then moving on to when you do it, this is how you're going to get the most bang for your buck. This is going to make sure that the structure of your grant proposals and your budgeting is infiltrated throughout your organization and that you're not living in a silo. So for my purposes, could you raise your hand if you're a board member? I know there's a lot of people without, so wave your hand or whatever, but a board member, great. Raise your hand if you are the executive director. Awesome. Raise your hand if your only function is to a development director or a grant writer. Anybody? Okay.
Development officer.
Development officer. Okay. So so again, this tiered kind of structure. Raise your hand if you're a volunteer. Awesome. And if you didn't raise your hand at all, what are you?
I'm a supervisor and run the shelter.
Okay. And Kelly, do you also write grants?
I have not. I just would like to know the basics so that I can help in that
Understand.
area.
Okay, great. So tangentially connected to the philanthropy program. Awesome. Anybody else want to share who they are, what they do?
I'm the housing
Regina,
director,
Oh.
and I'm sorry. I'm the housing director with Athens Land Trust, and I'm trying to learn the basics of grant writing to assist.
Perfect.
We are interns at a nonprofit, and we're just learning kind of
The basics.
Yeah, the basics.
Awesome.
I'm an
Anyone
AmeriCorps
else?
Vista worker, and
I just want to know if Gary had a question. His hand is raised.
Oh, I think he was raising his hand that he's an executive director.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so moving on. So we have a kind of a composition of this. So here's some boxes, doesn't encompass all, but this is typically some of the buckets that people find their grant writing structure in. They take all of the grants that they wrote last year, They take them out, they dust them off, and they reapply. That's it. They don't create any new programs or think about any programs that might fit better. It's just simply, we do like this rotation. We just do it again and again and again. Some organizations are constantly seeking new opportunities that meet the program and meet their needs. So they are very solid in this is what we do and will apply to any foundation that will accommodate or that seems to be connected to our mission and our programs and our vision. Some organizations will go, hey, here's a grant application. We kind of do this. Let's create a program around that and write some grants and see if we can find some more money. We have some organizations where the program staff say we have to expand what we do to serve a new need in our community. We've designed a program. Grant writer, go find us a way to fund this program. We have some organizations where the money people say, we don't have enough money, go find more money. And then, you know, some other kind of composition, this other bucket. Now, a great grant writing program does all of it. It is a complex process in which you determine how to expand and how to grow and to figure out where the money is, how to meet your needs, and do it all. But all of this stuff, every single bucket, requires planning, requires all hands on deck to fully understand what gaps in financial needs we have, whether or not a program is fully funded or not, whether it's losing money or not. Raise your hand if you know a program makes money. Do you know, after you've taken into account staffing and expenses and cost per person served and all of it? Sometimes when we can sometimes think about our fundraising events and we can say on a balance sheet, we spent this much and we brought this in, and I can tell you that we made money. But some of you are not taking into account all of the hourly cost of staff and all of the things that didn't get done because the staff were focusing on this event. When I talk about, do we know whether or not a program is making money or not, it encompasses all of that. Do we know our profit margin? Not for profit does not mean that we're not a good business and have a good business plan. So these are some of the ideas that I want to place in your brain, and that these buckets might all need their own micro strategic plan around it. How do you constantly seek new opportunities that meet your needs without mission drift? So that's one. And then I want you to understand where your money comes from, where our money comes from, where the sector money comes from. Some of us are focusing on a very small piece of the pie, and grant writing needs to be part of all of the things that you do to raise money. It cannot be the single thing that you do to raise money. So we know that money comes from individuals. We should have a very vibrant and dynamic individual giving program. We need to have events. We need to make sure those events are used appropriately. Are we acquiring donors? Are those events retaining donors? We need earned income. We need to sell something. We need someone to purchase something from our organization. And that could be a contract from the government. That could be a program grant that is funding a program. But we have got to figure out how to earn revenue, which is very different than philanthropy. A sustainable organization has figured out how to earn at least 40% of their own money. They grew a money tree It grows every year, except during COVID. Sometimes pandemics kill money trees too. But we have a way to generate our own income that is a vibrant and perpetual funding source. We're asking corporations to sponsor or to give us money. We understand the complexity of corporate giving, and we're utilizing those tools. We have a planned giving program. We recognize that that being left in someone's will or being left assets for someone needs to be part of our giving program. And we write grants. So the grants process is part of this puzzle that we're asking grants from public, private, and again, the earned revenue comes in that corporate structure. So we've seen some of these charts before, but this is where the sources of funds are coming from. I want you to look at the pie. And I know that we're trying to get away from the deficit mindset of this pie is where everyone has to compete within. But the purpose in this is to appropriately focus the time, energy, and resources that you're utilizing in grant funding. And if you look at how much money comes from grants, and you are spending a lion's share, 75% of your time, energy, and resources in grants, yet you're not spending the appropriate amount of time in other places, you are competing for the smallest part of the pie. So I never want to do a grant workshop without reminding you where you should be spending your and diversifying your time, energy, and resources in terms of generating revenue. Okay. And then I want to share with you where money comes from, all money comes from. So I'm going to go back a slide. This sources of funds only really encompasses those really tiny slivers at the right side of the screen. So when we're talking about all of the places where you could generate money and where you should be spending time, energy, and effort, I think it's important that we recognize the landscape of where funding is available for us. So the 50% of private fees for services, that some of us don't have any opportunity for any of that. But if we do, we should maximize our efforts there. And then what government funding should we get? The government knows that they're underfunding the nonprofit sector. We only get 30 to 50% of all of our revenue from not paying the taxes, from our tax exemption status, right? When we compare a for-profit to a nonprofit, we're a nonprofit so that we retain some of the money that we make. It's underfunded when we're talking about the complex problems in our community that we're trying to solve. The government knows that, and there's money out there for us. I'll be providing some resources for you about where to look for those. But again, that's a consideration that needs to be a micro or a macro or a complete strategic plan for your organization about where your money comes from, and are you utilizing the tools available to you appropriately? Does that all make sense? Okay, so when you think about where your money's coming from, are you focused your efforts in the right places? And so do you know, as leaders of your organization, how much of your money comes from grants, how much of your money comes from earned revenue, and how much of your money comes from donations? And that is an important conversation, again, in planning your whole landscape and your annual strategic plan around earning revenue, generating revenue to do your mission. Okay, so another piece of data, and I know that I'm going quickly, but again, you have these slides for you. So religion gets 30% of all donations. So this is talking about individual dollars from individual folks, and we know why that is. And it's not just because churches and religious institutions provide a possibility of eternal life, and right, that's not the only reason. It's because they're really good at asking, and they have a solid case for support, and they accept donations in any form, in any way that that you are able to, and they continue to talk about your responsibility to the greater community of that religious institution. Learn from them. They're good at it. And then the rest of us fall below. So the dollars to and the individual donations to education, human services, foundations, health organizations, and on down. And I think it would be really interesting, it will be really interesting to see how this chart changes post-COVID, and whether it returns to this kind of normal configuration. Now, the next thing I want to talk about, again, data, is how many foundations there are in Michigan. I know some of you aren't from Michigan, but but this is where we're based. I would encourage you to go find the information that is from your state. So these numbers get scary. The total number of foundations in Michigan is a little over 2,000, and that number is shrinking. There are more foundations that are sunsetting, merging, or closing. Total assets, 31 billion. Annual giving is 1.6 billion. So when we look at GuideStar and we look at a foundation's 990 and we see how much money they have, we're like, wow, they have a lot of money. I'm going to ask for a lot of money. But there, and I'll go into this a little bit again in your data collection of specific foundations, they don't have to give all that away. They only have to give a certain percentage of the interest they make in a year. And most foundations have policies that restrict their ability to dig into their capital. And then annual gifts received is 1.7 billion. Let me make sure I put the right information on the next slide. I didn't. So here's, in Michigan, here's what I want to share. We have over 2,000 foundations in Michigan, 2181. 50 foundations, so that would bring us to 2,131. 50 foundations give 75% of all money given in Michigan. 50 foundations give away 75% of all money given, which means the 2,131 foundations are only giving away 25% of the money available, right? So that means for us, if you're not in with these organizations, with these big boys that have lots of money to give, again, where are we spending our resources? Where are we spending our time? And how are we allocating appropriate staff resources to go after money when we recognize that the majority of us are not in with these organizations, don't have a relationship with these organizations, don't have the criteria to meet their giving or their funding needs. And so now we have a much smaller piece of the pie. I am not trying to convince you to not write grants. I promise you, the first 30 minutes feels like it is. I am encouraging you to think about the optimum role of grant writing and seeking grants within your organization, and it has to be a piece, not the total of all your work, okay? So just putting it into perspective. Okay, So we also recognize that when we write grants, we're writing for grants for 3 different technically typical buckets. One is we're funding what we do, which is programs. We're writing grants to be able to deliver services. Operating, we need to write a grant that funds all the stuff that doesn't fall in a program bucket. Or capital, which is we need to purchase something, a piece of equipment or a roof or a building in terms of a physical location. If COVID taught us anything, it's that most of us don't need capital funding. And that has changed the way we think about living in a building and the purposes of re-roofing a building or repainting a building or having more waiting space. So think about how post-COVID, some foundations are going to be asking new information about your need to expand your physical space and just like our country is looking at infrastructure differently, it's no longer just roads, it's also childcare, that foundations are going to be migrating their space, their thought process into what is a capital expenditure, what is an infrastructure expenditure, and make sure that your organization is having the same evolution of thought there. Good? Okay, so 5-minute conversation, 3 to 4 people in a room. I want you to process this fire hose of information, of data that I just shared, and just start thinking about, talking about with your peers. Are you spending the right time in the right space? And I'll give you, again, 5 minutes. It's 10:37. We'll be back at 10:42. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. All right, give me a thumbs up if you're spending the appropriate amount of time in the appropriate amount of activity. Do I have one? Not one of you. Yay for Libby. She gets the gold star. Okay, so 1 or 2 of you just, if you unmute yourself, I'll call your name and let me know what your group needs to be spending more time doing. Julie. Julie Olin.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I'm getting back with the program here. What was the question?
Sorry. What did your group talk about in terms of needing to do, what they needed to focus on more?
Oh, we are all trying to figure out who to ask money from and recognizing that, like, we had somebody who had Kellogg's right close by, but that doesn't mean that they're going to be your go-to. So it's still about reaching out and having to do.
Yeah. Thank you, Julie. You froze a little bit, but I think we got most of it. Would anyone else like to share what your group was talking about? Bethany.
Oh, okay. Yes, we were wondering, and this is probably something that's coming up in the future slides, is there a clearinghouse or an on-site website that gives you all this information together in terms of the different foundations in Michigan and what they're focused on, you know, and so that you're not having to, you know, spend hours upon hour researching the internet?
Yep. There's a lot of, in fact, the very last slide gives you some resources and we are going to go into that, but there is no one place.
Okay, but it narrows it down a little bit, so you're not down the rabbit hole of the internet.
Right. Barb and then Patricia.
One we talked about is that, at least on our group, none of us have really revenue, like you were talking 40%. And so that was kind of, now we've talked about it and we're planning to try to pursue a few ideas, but it feels like it would take a while to make any significant amount of your bottom line. So, and what counts is my question is, we didn't get that far, but like, so you mentioned programs can be revenue. So I don't know if you're going to touch on that, but I'm confused about when something counts as revenue, like you get a grant for a program, is that revenue, or because it pays for somebody on your team, or is that just a grant, like in your buckets? So
I'll get into that. Great question. Patricia.
I'm not going to take up much time. I was in Bethany's group, and so that was what we talked primarily about was, how to determine which foundations philosophy meets with ours or each individual organization, so that we could narrow that down. Of those 2,181 foundations, are there a handful that are fit within our philosophy so that we can expend our energy in that area? So anyways, that's all. That was same group.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. So a question that I've written down, I know I've got slides, I'm going to dig into it, but what is earned revenue? I'll dig into that a little bit. It's a whole nother workshop. So just wanted to, but we'll get there, I promise. Okay, so one of the things that I acknowledge, and for some organizations, if you have the opportunity and yet are squandering the opportunity for research and design, right? This for-profit conversation of truly designing programs, piloting programs, evaluating whether or not we're meeting our impact. If you have the opportunity, if you have the time, if you have the resources and are skipping this step, or skipping this opportunity, you are missing out on a story that you could be telling your funders that would generate additional revenue, generate additional dollars for you. So many of us have been using the same, I'm going to call it curriculum or program design for the last 20 years. We've not done anything different. We have this square peg, we're shoving in a round hole, and somehow we're going to find something good out of it. And we're not doing the true evaluation that is required. So again, if we're going to be focused on becoming competitive and making sure that our programs deserve the amount of funding that we're asking for, we need this kind of design and redesign, rethinking of our programs on a regular basis. So in your, again, optimal purpose of grant writing is to fund something that's working. We have to prove that it's working. So if your evaluation methods are still measuring people who walk through the door, or the number of peanut butter sandwiches you distributed, and not necessarily how many people you served are less hungry than they were yesterday and have more ability to stay less hungry, then you're simply rinsing and repeating the same kind of, and I apologize, food pantries are amazing. I'm not discounting food pantries, but if the same person has been coming to my food pantry for 20 years, then our community system, our community structure is not working. So we need advancement, and we need to prove advancement. We cannot be counting grains of sand. So we need to measure impact. And if we can tell the story of the change that's being created, the improvement in our community and the improvement in lives based on what we're doing, we're going to generate more resources to do more of that. So true evaluation, good evaluation is critical. When we're launching a new program, we need to figure out some kind of ongoing program planning, research and design, piloting and launching, and sharing back with donors and funders this is what we learned, and here's the changes that we made based on what we learned. Make sense? Okay. So the other thing that we need to do is we need our strategic plan to guide our grant writing, which means that if you don't have a strategic plan, or if your strategic plan isn't working, or you had to abandon the whole thing because of COVID, it's time to revisit that. So our strategic plan or our strategic planning, it can be adaptive, it can be real time, but we have to have a destination in mind, and that becomes our organizational roadmap. Everything that we do leads us to this desired future state. Hopefully your vision, your mission, vision, values, your vision is guiding you toward this future state. So again, if your organization doesn't have a vision, your strategic plan may not actually be going in a specific direction. You might be meandering. So if you are a grant writer, if you're in charge of raising money for your organization, scream more loudly about getting a strategic plan done. This allows you to be forward thinking. This allows you to think about where your programs ought to be in a year or 2 or 5, what you should be producing in terms of impact, and designing a grant application that gets you there. So many of us spend all of our time looking backwards, looking in the rearview mirror. This is what we did, not necessarily designing where you're going. A rolling strategic plan, meaning one that never expires, you just refresh it and renew it, is always a really good idea, because you have this 10-year plan and then a strategic plan that renews every 2 years, that's getting you to this ultimate destination. And to remember that your strategic plan not only drives where you're spending your money, but it also drives your fund development. So we're talking about pieces and parts of your grant writing strategy and all of the components that are required to truly write a grant application that is competitive and meets the needs of your funder to go, this is an organization I want to invest in. Again, I want to recognize that in the for-profit world, we actually get to ask people to get really excited about where we're going and the output and the return on investment. And we use those words. They're the same words, we just have different names for them, the same meanings, different names for them in the nonprofit sector. Funders are investing in our future, and we need to design that future and get our funders excited about where we're going. When strategic plans do not drive our budget or drive fund development, then we're actually in opposition and we end up going nowhere. We're at a dead end street. So again, this is a conversation to bring to your board. It's a conversation to bring to your staff, but we need a strategic plan that actually designs our future state, and everybody on the team is following that. So let me share an example. If our mission and vision are not in alignment, and meaning that our mission is to end hunger, and our vision is a world without hunger, and yet our programs are delivering peanut butter sandwiches, that is not congruent. What we're doing is never going to get us there. And so the program staff and the program design needs to understand what our mission and our vision is truly communicating, and make sure that everything is congruent, that this program really does get us there. Make sense? This is a real life example. There's a program that says inspiring the love of reading in middle schoolers. And the only program they do is drop off books to middle school. Does that program get them there? And the answer is always no. How is handing someone a book inspiring a love of reading? And there is a disconnect there. Make sense? So no strategic plan that guides the budget or fund development feeds a chase the money mentality, a today mentality. How do we fund today? And increases the risk of being awarded funds that don't align with our capabilities or our future state. And it creates mission drift, chasing the money. Well-written strategic plans become a decision-making tool, and it's a message to your supporters that you know your strengths and weaknesses, you know where you want to go, and you're preparing to make impact and use resources most effectively and in a most effective manner. If you have a strategic plan or are actually talking about those goals and objectives in your grant application and making sure that there's synergy there, you're going to have a stronger application. Make sense? Okay. And it's a marketing tool. Okay. My favorite tool of all times. Has anyone seen this chart before, a chart like this? Okay, this is a matrix map. There is actually a tool, and on the next slide, I'm going to tell you where to find the tool. It's a public domain tool. What this is doing is it's allowing your organization to literally map based on this triple bottom line. For-profits are thinking about one bottom line. Does it make money, and how much money did it make us? We actually care about mission and mission achievement, and we care about impact, triple bottom line. So when we look at our HEART programs, these are programs that have high mission impact. We have to know what our impact is desired to be. High mission impact, but we're not making any money here. Our stars are programs that make a lot of money, whether that's making a lot of money that's attractive to donors that want to give us gifts, making a lot of money because it's bringing in a lot of grant dollars, or it's bringing in earned revenue. High mission impact, and it's making money. So for nonprofit organizations, we want to be north of that line. We need to be making money, because if our programs are making money, it's funding operations, right? Anything south of that line, that anchor, no mission impact and low profitability. If you have programs or services or activities that fall in that line, you need to figure out how to get rid of them. And some of you are bound by contracts that were poorly written and got you into a no-win situation that you're going to have to figure out how to get out of, but that's really important. The dollar signs, your money trees, the low mission impact but high profitability. Those might be fundraisers. If your spaghetti dinner does not fit in this criteria, you've got to stop doing the spaghetti dinner. Yes, you're going to get links to the resources. In the next slide, there's going to be a link, I promise. So actually mapping your programs based on where the money comes from, whether or not it's achieving your mission, and whether or not it's having high impact is a really important conversation for everyone within your organization, and to utilize this tool in your grant writing to clearly communicate where this falls in terms of impact is important. Not guesses, but actual data. So the Google search, if you type in nonprofit quarterly matrix map, you're going to find a document that comes out of Nonprofit Quarterly. It's a link to the bottom, which is a nonprofit sustainability by Jean Bell. So you're going to find this again. It's open source. It's a Excel spreadsheet that's going to take you a year to complete. It's lots of information, but it's a truly impactful process to go through. You need to identify your lines of business. You need to simply having your organization understand what programs you have, what your organization defines as a program is a very critical step. It assesses your mission impact. This is crazy good as a developmental process for your organization. How do we define impact? And it requires you to go out and ask your clients, if this is the impact we're intending, does it meet your need? Is that what we're truly doing? And then mapping your results. We can help you do this. We can help you design this. But I also think that you can do this on your own. This is a really cool tool to begin working through, but it requires your entire organization. So these are the things you could choose within this tool to measure your alignment with your core mission, whether or not you execute with excellence. Execute with excellence. And guess what? We don't get to answer that question. It's not an internal question. It's an external question. And we have to be willing to hear the answer. Okay? So would our clients, would the people that receive our services agree that we're providing programs with excellence? There's also a scale, right? How many people did we reach? Is it 5 or is it 100? But if our excellence and execution for 5 people is off the charts, then we're a worthy program. We've touched 5 lives and made huge impact. The depth of intervention or contact that each business line provides, whether or not we're building community or constituency, and then are we filling an important gap? All of those things are things that we could be measuring within our organization. And if we come away with a positive score and utilize those scores in our grant application, we become more competitive, and this process makes you more sustainable. Do you love it? I love it. Okay. So Angela asked, how does a backbone network organization map when we don't directly provide programs? That's a great question. You do provide something, right? And so define that something, because the services that you provide are the services of your backbone, right? You have function, you have activities that you can measure, and as a backbone organization, measuring the impact of what you do. So, and let's be honest, every single one of us has a backbone structure within our organization called operations, called admin. And those are also things that we should be measuring the impact of, even if it doesn't go externally. We need to identify all functions of our organization. Good? Okay, so great process. Okay, so because I love it so much, I want you to talk about it. So we're gonna go into another breakout room, 5 minutes, again, 4 people. And I'll put, I'll give you a minute to take a picture of this slide if you want. But I want you to talk about how measuring or talking about or creating a plan around improving, even if you don't use the tool, but you think differently about your evaluation, about your output. How might that help your organization? So your breakout is, how would you utilize this information to strengthen your programs? And how would you utilize this information to focus and strengthen your grant application? You've got 5 minutes. See you later. Welcome back, everybody. Same drill. Can I have 2 or 3 people that are willing to talk about how they might use this information to strengthen programs and or grant applications? Anybody?
Regina, we just talked about communication and how important it is, and telling the stories rather than us saying, you know, we did this and we did that and gave money for this and it really helped. You have to get the people who receive that money, or the families or the nonprofits, to determine and talk about, how it affected them and the community.
Sure. Great. Good point. Alyssa.
Hi, my name is Alyssa. I'm with Constellation Cat Cafe in East Lansing, and we're in the process of going through becoming a nonprofit right now. And so this is really helpful in terms of when you were mentioning how strategic plan can boost grant applications in the future, and definitely going to take
Sorry, I just lost audio. Hold on.
No problem.
You keep talking.
Okay, sounds good. I'm just looking forward to using the matrix you provided, and just really grateful for the resources that you are sharing here. So thank you.
Can someone else say something to make sure my ears are working?
Can you hear me?
I can. Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Gary, I'm like, you guys go ahead. Thank you. Sorry about that, Alyssa. I didn't hear any of it, but anyone else want to share?
I can share that in our group that all three of us weren't really sure how to use it, and I'm not, just to be transparent. And it looks like a great tool. I know you really like it, so that makes me feel really good about it. But we don't have a strategic plan at this point. I am really challenged with identifying the impact because I'm serving a statewide agency. And so I'm a little unclear as how I would take that tool into a board meeting and really start populating it at this point. So I actually kind of need more.
So that's a great point, because each component would be, where do we start with this?
Yeah.
And I think and again, I said it will probably take a year. And for some of you, it may take 5 years to populate the tool, because some of us can't actually identify what a program is and isn't. And if we don't understand what our programs are, how can we measure impact?
Yeah.
So there's some really, really strong and deep conversations about why it is we exist. I mean, some of these conversations are going to take you right back to the genesis of your organization. What did we hope to accomplish? And it's going to center your strategies, your activities around some of us are just doing. And Patricia, you might find that because you can't answer these questions, that you're just doing. You're not actually strategizing. You don't have a vision. You don't have an idea of a future state. You don't know why you exist. And some of you may come away with, wow, we do a whole bunch of work just to employ people, but we're not making a difference. And that conversation will be a seismic shift for many of you to be able to generate greater impact. Does that make sense? So if you're like, wow, I don't know how to answer any of these, that in and of itself generates a 5-year plan for you. Go ahead, Bethany.
Well, one of the things we were talking about is, how do you measure some of these things? Do you have are you going to be discussing that, or do you have a resource for different ways to measure, surveys, what are some of the better ways to do that?
Great question. And some of us actually hire an evaluator, somebody that's doing deliberate pre and post testing. So there is again, this conversation of what are we measuring and how do we measure progress? And if we're measuring grains of sand on a beach, right? And by teaspoons or cupfuls, and just widgets, are we measuring widgets? We produced something, but we're actually not measuring quantitatively or qualitatively what was the experience for the person that received it? What is the change in them? And so again, some of us are just doing, and we have not had a conversation about why we do what we do, how we do what we do, and whether or not we're doing anything that is actually creating change. and as a sector with 52,000 nonprofits in Michigan and 1.5 million nonprofits in the United States, I can guarantee you that if you ask yourself whether or not you're measuring change, the majority of us will say no. Okay? Okay. Okay, so now let's get into grants. I am going to talk about evaluation. Again, this is a 2-hour workshop. Every slide could be a day-long session, okay? But we're all zoomed out. 2 hours is all we can bear. Okay, so grants. So there's a bunch of different, a couple of different kinds of foundation types, and it's really important for us to know how much money they can actually distribute legally. And it's important to note that a couple of historical pieces. Ronald Reagan, back in the early 80s, actually expanded philanthropy and decreased the government's role in deciding and funding how to solve complex problems and place that burden on nonprofit organizations. So started shrinking the government and increasing philanthropy. Now, this was all well and good because the interest that most foundations and most investments were generating were about 25%. Yay! There's a lot of money. How much is it today? Not that much. You can look at your retirement accounts. They're not growing like that anymore. So, but we haven't changed that philosophy very much. There's a recognition that the payout of foundations is limited to a % of the money that they make on interest. For private, the payout is required to be 5% of its assets. If you're making, so again, this is why the big boys, the big foundations are able to give so much. They have a lot, they're making a lot, and therefore when they give away 5%, it's a lot. But if you have $100,000 foundation that's only generating 1 or 2% interest a year, and they're able to give away 5% of that, their ability is very small if they're not going to dig into bone, okay? So we need to recognize that their assets does not translate into what they're able to give. Now, community foundations. Community foundation spending income is determined annually based on a rolling 12-quarter market value average. This is why your community foundations don't, especially after the last recession, around this recession when the market dipped so badly, and that kind of fluctuation brings those averages down. And even though they might have money in the bank, they can't give it away because of the rolling 12 quarters. So again, when we go back to where should I be spending my time, energy, and resources to generate income, sometimes last year's market crash impacts where I make decisions today, right? So I think it's just important to know where those assets are. Kim, do you want to share any other information? Kim's with a community foundation.
We're a little bit different in that we're a 28-quarter rolling average balance, Regina, which is 7 years long, which is unbelievable. But it actually allows us to, see a whole 7-year picture of good and bad economy. So it averages a little bit better with that. But yes, you're right on. That's exactly how we do it. We calculate, our board determines the payout for spendable, which we are at 4.65 of assets.
Okay. So your tail whip is pretty significant, right? You're still back when Obama was in making decisions, right? There's a long haul there and all of those market decisions and all of those market fluctuations. So a recognition that these are benchmarks, but then within that, foundations can make different decisions as long as they're meeting those minimum criteria. Here are some resources for your state and federal contracts and RFPs. So again, you have these slides in your email, but there's many government websites. One of the a great resource is the MSU Grants and Related Resources page. I would Google that, and there's multiple pages within that site. And then grants.gov, there is a tab on their website called Learning Center, and they have several resources around federal grants. So MSU is going to be Michigan-based, state contracts, but you've got a ton of opportunities to explore if you're eligible for anything. Again, you might. The government is actually really good about planning grants, allowing you to ask for money to design something. And if your design goes well, there will be another opportunity for you to actually launch the program in perpetuity. So the thing that I want you to recognize when you start getting into state, local, grants, the government block grants, the FEMA grants, is that you must calculate the reporting requirements into your return on investment. That some of the things that you have to start evaluating are going to be an extremely heavy lift, very time consuming, and transform how you do the program because of the data that you need to collect and then be able to report out. So your return on investment and understanding how much that program costs your organization and how much evaluation will cost your organization is going to be critical to the budget that you create for your federal grants. Because if you ask for too little, you're going to get into that matrix map with the anchor. Very low impact and high cost, which is going to sink your ship. Make sense? Okay. So let's get into the grant writing cycle. This is suggested. I know many of you have your own process, but what I'd like you to notice is where writing the proposal should fall in your process. Many of you start there. Many of you skip lots of important steps. And it's important to recognize where the actual grant application and the grant process should fall. So in your research with grant, when you're possible funders, you need to build in time to develop relationships, to reach out to your program coordinators of those foundations to say, hey, I'm thinking about applying for this. Can I just introduce, and most program coordinators are even going to say, sure, go ahead and try. Doesn't really fit right now. Hear that, because we're going to go back and remind ourselves where we should be spending our time, energy, and effort. And if this is a low possibility, is this where we should spend our effort to write a grant? Sometimes writing a grant is a relationship building exercise in and of itself. What's the return on investment of writing that application? What's the return on investment of writing a grant application that is poorly fitted with the foundation, poorly written, and poorly thought out? So when we think about the eventual outcome of let's throw our hat in that ring, do so with intentionality and to build relationship and integrity and respect from your organization, not necessarily throw words on a piece of paper and see if it fits. Your chances of building a long-term relationship with a poorly written grant is significantly decreased, especially if you're not in alignment right now. Does that make sense to you? So again, identifying your funding needs, going back to that slide with all those different buckets. How are we identifying our funding needs? what program is underfunded, what programs are well funded, what programs need to expand, what programs need to shrink. All of those things are critical conversations within your organization. Developing the budget, I'm going to go into how your organization develops budget, but understanding of all of the funding sources you currently have and building a program budget for your grant application should come first, because you're writing your grant application around the deficiencies in the budget. If you don't build your budget first, you're writing a grant application and talking about all this stuff that the money is going to be used for that you don't actually need money for. If staffing is already covered through another grant, if staffing is already fine, or you actually need pizza, not pens, whatever, then you can align the needs of your program with a funder that really likes to fund pizza. But if you choose a funder that wants to fund pens and you cannot communicate in a budget that that's what you need, it's a poorly written grant. So recognize the components and the structure of what comes first to get you to a solid proposal. So where is your money coming from and where are the gaps? What is the budget? And then research the possible funders, then fill out that budget form in that grant application. Can you make a case? Most foundations will go to the budget first. Most foundations will make sure you added correctly. And if you can't pass those two tests, then most likely your application is not going to go that far. So focus on the money. That is hard data for them, black and white. Get that right. And then make sure that those funding gaps that you're asking for aligns with their funding priorities. Dig deep in those foundation websites and in their documents. Understand what values they're telling you they are aligned with. Understand what they will and will not fund. Understand what they want out of for their communities. Foundations have a mission, vision, and values. Foundations are looking at outcomes for their communities. So if you're in contradiction with what they want for their community, the change they want to see, you're less likely to get funded. Use these as decision tools to determine whether or not you're going to submit an application. And then reach out to the program director. Leave a message, send an email, ask for a meeting. But you want to make sure that that you're asking quality questions. Don't ask if they're going to fund you. They can't say until they see their grant application and see all the other applications that are there. But you do need to build a relationship, at least on some level, and ask, is there any new information, or is there any new values or any extenuating circumstances that I need to be aware of as I write my proposal? We talked about, sorry, I'm going to drink water. We talked about all of, and I'm going to give you resources for all of these foundations, but the books that you can buy, the directories of foundations and everything that they fund, that changes. COVID changed it. And have all of those foundations updated all of these search engines with their new criteria? Probably not. So you're using all of the grant grant search engines and the foundation of directory of foundations on all these other tools that are in here. You're using it to narrow it down, but it's not the end of your research. You have to dig deeper to determine whether or not you're actually going to be eligible for those applications. And then you write your proposal, and then you recognize, just as with any donation that you receive, the donation is the start, not the end. There's a whole process of recognition and thank you and follow-up and reporting in order for you to nurture, develop, and advance that relationship with that foundation, okay? This is one slide, could be a day. Okay, So I do want to talk about budgeting. And again, this could be a whole conversation in and of itself. It's one slide. So many of us are doing income-based budgeting. You may think that you're doing expense-based budgeting, but I guarantee most of us are not. But expense-based budgeting would first say, how much should I be paying my staff? Am I paying my staff a living wage? Am I paying my staff enough to retain them? Am I providing the benefits that they need to have health insurance and put food on their table? Is my program and my program design and my evaluation costs all built into my budget? Am I evaluating appropriately? If you are answering, no, my staff is not paid well, no, I cannot provide health insurance, I'm not evaluating because I can't afford it, then you are doing income-based budgeting, which is, I know I can generate $100,000 and here's how I'm dividing that in between operations and staffing. And it's the pie and I can't make the pie any bigger. If we build a budget, even if we can't always get there every year, but we need to at least understand what we should cost and work toward that rather than this is how much money I can guarantee. Many organizations that I've worked with, that Nonprofit Network has worked with, that has done this exercise of expense-based budgeting have seen the results, have seen growth within 4 to 5 years because they anticipated and then were able to storytell and provide the data about what growth looks like for them. And then as you grow and get more sophisticated in your budget, you do have a true understanding of your administration expenses. What does it mean? So let's think about an executive director who is spending 95% of their time on programs. An executive director who's responsible for fundraising, staff evaluation, hiring, recruiting, board development. At the end of the day, they're only spending 5% on those administrative duties. What do you think that means for an organization? That it's stuck, it has no opportunity for growth, it has no opportunity for building capacity. So when we start thinking about the appropriate amount of admin expenses and building that into our budget for capacity building and growth, then we again get to move toward expense-based budgeting rather than income-based budgeting. And I can tell you that for an organization that that espouses or that celebrates the fact that they only have 3% operating expenses is not a strong organization. That is not a story to celebrate. And so just think about, well, you know, our donors don't like any money to go to admin. Our donors don't, you know, want 100% of our costs to go to serving the people. Well, if that's the story you're telling, and if you're not educating your donors differently, you're more likely to close your doors in a year or two than an organization that is getting fully funded for serving the mission appropriately. Make sense? So some of our storytelling in our grant applications to fund operations and to change the story around admin costs is part of that grant application process. Make sense? Okay, and just a notation, if you did your matrix map, it would help in this conversation. Libby. Oh, you were clapping, not you were waving.
I'm just clapping. I agree with everything, Regina. So good. So.
Okay, good. Awesome. All right. Okay, so now we're going to get into grant writing. I'm going to check my chat, just make sure. Yes, thanks, Alyssa. I love Dan. That TED Talk that he did watch it, understand it, No one else is there yet. No foundation is there yet. But Dan Pallotta talks about the fact that we're curing cancer and have to cure cancer based on a 3 a.m. PSA instead of an 8 p.m. primetime Super Bowl ad to generate dollars. And it is a really good message. Okay, so grant writing. Research, research, research. And it's not just researching the grant application, it's researching what other organizations are doing and whether or not they're being successful. Aligning yourself with an organization that has done true evaluation in a community like yours recently, and you are doing almost the exact same thing, not skipping out on the important things. You could show to a foundation, look, if we did this, we would get the same results. And doing that kind of research, even if you can't afford the evaluation like they did, you can utilize their evaluation. But don't pick a nonprofit that is functioning in Los Angeles if you're in Owasso, Michigan, right? Like you have to align the demographics and the size and the scale and the scope of what you're doing. But research, research, research. What's working, what's not, and why. And master that data. Master your own data. What are your outcomes? Who are you serving? Look at the disparities within your own data. If you have a subset of population that is not succeeding like the rest of the population that you serve, then that should be where you focus your grant efforts. Why is that? Focus, this population is not succeeding like the other populations within our organization. Check yourself first. Why is that? Do you have a bias? Do you have a barrier? Have you created an unintended circumstance that you need to be aware of and take down? Do you need to divert resources to this population so that they have better access? Whatever it is, look at your, master your data, look at the disparities within your data. If you are not looking at disparities, you're not evaluating yourself truthfully, transparently, and effectively. So you've got to desegregate your data. Recognize that a grant application is more technical writing than creative writing, right? So we do want to tell stories, but we don't want to be overly dramatic. Nowhere in your grant application should it say on a dark, stormy night, right? But we do want to be empathetic. We want to ensure that our donors tap into their empathy for the people that we serve. That grant writing, again, is one component of the relational fund development. We can utilize the stories we tell in our grant applications, in our newsletters, in our appeal letters. So make sure when you write something, it can and should be used elsewhere. Okay, so now let's talk about researching a foundation. We need to take time to gather information from their annual report. What are the things that they're celebrating? And are there things that they're celebrating that we can align with, that we can communicate that we have added to or in parallel with? You have online searches, you have Grant Station. Most libraries have a grant station that is available to you, and now it's all virtual. You don't even have to go into the library. You just call and you get their password, and as long as no one else is on it, you might still have to make an appointment because they don't have that many users available, but talk to your local library. Also, some of your local foundations purchase the search engines and might have those available. Look at GuideStar, guidestar.org. All foundations are just like nonprofits. They have to produce a 990. You can get a lot of information from the 990 of the foundations about where their money comes from, where their money goes, how much assets they have, those types of things. And then do a Google search about that foundation, see if they have a website, see how when it was last updated. We have lots of family foundations that have forgotten they have a website. You might have to go find them on Facebook, but you do want current and relevant information, because if you don't have it, you're going to waste your time because they've changed or transformed the way they do things. The Council on Foundations, Michigan has a Council on Foundations, but there's a lot of opportunity to kind of narrow your search. For those of you that are, how do I say this? I said it before. If you don't have a purpose, if you don't understand your purpose, then it's going to be much harder for you to find that needle in the haystack. If you know what kind of funds you're looking for, you're searching for a foundation that meets your criteria becomes way easier than searching for any foundation that will fund any possible thing that you're doing. Okay? If you want to waste a couple of days on just, hey, where's a new net I could cast? Great. But again, don't squander that searching by producing a application that isn't going to get you anywhere. And develop your list of questions that you want to ask when you reach out to that foundation to say, hey, I want to know if we're a great fit. I think we are. I think I'm in total alignment with your values and with your criteria. Is it okay if we chat on the phone for about 15 minutes and I just check again, you don't want to ask, will you fund this? You want to ask whether or not your mission and vision and programs align with their outcomes, and have good questions to ask. And remember that you don't get a yes or no. If you apply, we'll give you money, right? So it's a relationship building conversation. And then also look at their 990 to, and the 990 has changed. Back in the day, you could actually get a list of all the organizations that a foundation has funded to see if there's anyone like you, and what they funded for. Was it programs? Was it operations? Was it capital? And those criteria have changed. We don't get that. Some foundations still provide it, but many do not. Okay, just looking at my clock. So again, your writing style, you need to use creative writing sparingly and appropriately. Stick to technical writing, clear, concise, focused. I'm giving you permission right now that if your foundation gives you a 3,000 word limit, you don't have to use 3,000 words, okay? Make your case, make it clearly, say what you need to say, but when you're done, stop writing, okay? You need to be easily understood. You need to watch for errors, and know your audience, which you could find out from the website. Who is actually reading your application? And if your application is being read by a whole bunch of industry-specific people, you're a homeless shelter, and there's a whole bunch of people that run homeless shelters that are actually reviewing the grant, then speak in a language that fits them. If you're writing to a community foundation that is going to be a distribution committee of volunteers from diverse backgrounds, then write at a much less technical level. Spell out every word, don't use acronyms, all of that. And again, use the creative writing to storytell about your clients, the qualitative versus the quantitative. Your grant application, your grant writing must convince that the project addresses the need. These are items that I would actually have in front of you as you write the grant. Does my project address the need that I'm communicating? Make sure they align, make sure they connect, that the need is urgent. Why would if I only have $100,000 to give away, and I'm going to be writing these checks this summer, and you're talking about a program that actually doesn't start until next summer, why would I allocate funds to you in this grant round? So make sure that there's a timeliness and urgency in your request. Make sure that your organization and your staff are communicating that they are qualified to do the work and to do the projects that are being requested. Case in point, when your foundation application requires a list of your board of directors, guess what? They don't care about names. They're looking for expertise. They're looking at longevity. They're looking at the expertise in governance. And that's the same thing when they're asking for the key staff. How is this person qualified to do what you're claiming they should do? Make sure the goals are achievable and measurable. So when you're talking about evaluation goals, you're not going to say that 100% of the people we meet and serve are not going to be homeless in a year, right? Foundations can see an unrealistic goal, and if you create an unrealistic goal, they'll know that you don't have a firm grasp on reality. They're less likely to invest in your services. So be realistic. And then make sure that your methods are well planned. Make sure that your grant application, even if you're not asking for pizza, but you know that in order to attract the youth to your program, that you're providing food, that you're communicating that in your grant application. And then recognize the other people that are in your space. So if duplication is not bad, especially when everybody has a really long waiting list for services, but communicate how you coordinate and partner with all the people that are in your space. You don't want to communicate that you're competing. And foundations don't actually mind funding many things that are similar. They like to align their and coordinate their funding. So just recognize that and use your partners or the other people in your space with letters of support indicating, yes, we're in the same space, but we actually think they're doing a good job and they're helping to alleviate the pressure on the pipeline, whatever that might be. Okay, so in the chat, and where am I on my slides? So just talk a little bit. I won't put you in another breakout room because I think I don't have time. But I want you to start communicating what you're going to stop doing, what you need to learn more about, and what you're going to need, what you want to start doing as it relates to the grant applications that you want to submit. And I know I want to have questions, so I'm just checking where I am. Okay, I'm going to blow through some slides right now. So just start talking about that. So when we start talking about measuring your results, we need to identify the impact we're trying to achieve and then measure how far we're getting in that. What is different? Did behaviors change? And then the quantitative is how many did we serve? How many attended? Who attended? Is the target audience, if we're trying to reach third graders for a reading program, and yet we're not measuring the fact that fifth graders attended our program, not third graders, you know, we need to think about what we're measuring and who we're communicating to. So this pre and post testing, sorry. So the pre and post surveys, but watch your questions. This is a great place to spend money, meaning that if you have a solid evaluator that you've hired that will craft your evaluation questions, even if you, use the same questions for a year, as long as your program doesn't change, or 3 years or whatever, but an evaluator will make sure that you're not asking complex questions, meaning that your question doesn't say, this program was accessible and affordable. Well, what's the answer answering? If you say yes or no, did I answer yes to 2 or did I answer no to 1? So the questions need to be truly crafted well. Participant interviews. You might want to do focus groups. You might want to sit down with a portion of the people that attended and interviewed what was occurring for them before and what has been occurring for them after, asking open-ended questions, having them tell their story, and then taking those stories, statistically relevant, right? So if you have 100 people that have attended your program, you might want to do 10 interviews, but then taking out all of the relevant themes or the consistent themes so that you can kind of clarify all of that. And then longitudinal studies, which would take and collect the contact information, and you would follow people over time. The start of the program, the middle of the program, the end of the program, and then 6 months after the program. And then quantitative is you're just measuring numbers. You're just statistically looking at who completed and how many people attended. Raise your hand if you think quantitative evaluation is giving you the stories you need to generate the income you need. Raise your hand if qualitative evaluation is going to get you where you need to go in terms of communicating what you're doing and why you're doing it. Yeah. How many of you, raise your hand, are doing qualitative evaluation? Good, good, good. The rest of you need to get there, at least in part and parcel. And again, going back to that program matrix, what is our purpose? What impact are we trying to accomplish? And how are we getting there? Okay, this was a breakout. We're not doing it. Okay, budget. This is another data source. I talked about this in the beginning. This is why we do it first, because it's a data source, and we're not embedding this other or miscellaneous. We're being transparent in where we're spending money. We're making sure that our budget validates our proposal. We're communicating our relationship with other funding sources and partnerships. And the most critical elements of the project are identified in our budget or our budget narrative, and that those critical components are getting the majority of the money that's being given to us. This is a strategic plan or a micro strategic plan within and of itself. How are we communicating using our budget what's important to us? And then helping the entire team get on board. Grant writing should be a staff retreat. What do we want to do? What do we want to accomplish? Where do we need more money? What do our program staff feel is underfunded? What do our program staff need in terms of resources and expertise and wisdom to get the outcomes and the achievable, measurable results that we've all been wanting? And then making sure the influencing up, meaning that we give our program staff an opportunity to give feedback, that in our strategic plan, if our strategic plan is not focused on the most appropriate things, that our program staff can communicate what they're seeing from the field and providing that information. And then if you're a newbie to grant writing, even if you're not a newbie, that you're taking enough time, building into your timeline for crafting a grant application, that you have enough time for somebody else to read it, that you have enough time to and take another grant writer and say, red pen this. My best grant writing experience was when I had a program director that said, okay, you want it? I will absolutely rip your grant application apart. And it was amazing. She was cruel. She was brutal. She was mean, but she identified all of my weak points. And I have never forgotten that one application that was reviewed that reminded me that I was making statements without evidence. And so one of the comments that she made was, who said this? Is this you? Like, where'd you get this? You pulled this out of the air. Cite your source, right? So where are all the weak points in your grant writing style? Shared with me that some of the examples I was using were not relevant to the case I was trying to make. All of those things are really good. Bethany.
There we go. I know we're running out of time, but all of this, you're talking about the evaluation portion of it. If you're starting a new program, how do you implement that, or how do you, you can't really evaluate? Do you look at similar programs and how their outcomes are? How do you do that for a new program?
So for a new program, you're going to communicate how you're going to evaluate and what you anticipate getting out of the evaluation. So what do you anticipate seeing? And make sure that you're going back to the foundation in your reporting to say we're actually seeing what we expected to see.
And would you cite previous programs that had that
you're using similar strategies and expect similar outcomes from that? And here's the wisdom and expertise that you have around the table that produced this output. Same people are going to have an expectation of that output. Okay. Okay, so your resources, again, here's a couple of opportunities. I'm going to open up the chat and open it up for any questions in the final minutes. Again, these slides should be in your email. I do have confirmation that it was emailed out, but after it started. Okay, Alyssa wants to know if anyone uses a CRM that they love. Most likely, Alyssa, the one they love would be one that you hate. It's so hard. But does anyone have any tracking tools that they like? Okay. Okay. And then if two organizations are collaborating on a project or a specific goal, can these two nonprofits apply for a grant jointly, or would they have to apply each separately? I think my answer is it depends. If you're collaborating or coordinating with another organization, you might want to choose one as the fiduciary so that whatever money you get is given to one organization and they distribute it. One of the risks and the rewards is that if both organizations apply, you need to be very deliberate and intentional about what happens if only one receives the money and the other doesn't. And what if their grant application isn't as strong? So I think if both programs can live independently or work independently, I think it's okay to apply with two, but a fiduciary might make more sense. Again, that's a short answer to a very complicated question. Any other questions at 11:59?
Regina, I just wanted to say you're spot on with all of the information about the applicants and completing the application. We get applicants every year, one or two, that are outside our region, outside of our state sometimes, and they wasted all of that time sending us an application, all their documents, and they don't relate to us at all, and we have to send them a sorry, that doesn't cover our area, we're within, Shiawassee County. Whereas if they would have just looked it up and saw, we even read our mission statement. It says that we are covering the Shiawassee community area, region, county. So that's so important. And then also the part you mentioned where if you're applying for different grants, make sure your grant matches to the purpose of that fund or grant giving. We have another foundation that has a grant through us. It's a hospital foundation, and we have several people that apply, but it's in kind of competition with the hospital's foundation. So they're not going to give that grant out for that purpose because they already do that.
Right.
So think about your grant. Why would that grantee,
Right.
want to give out the money?
Right. Thank you, Kim. Thank you. And then, yes, Libby said, make sure you address all of the grantors' questions. Follow instructions. Again, this is a simple thing. I'm going to remind us that when we're hiring people, one of the things we do is did the applicant follow instructions in our application process for a job? Grantors are going to do the same thing. It's a clear indication that somebody's not checking all the boxes and not being intentional with their words. So awesome. It's 12:01. Thank you very much. If it's sunny where you are, enjoy it. There's an evaluation QR code. You'll also get a link in your email later on, but we love your feedback. I use it in performance evaluation. My board uses it in performance evaluations. So we appreciate it. This is our pre and post test of whether or not this met our expectation for you. So thank you very much. Have a great day.